It's good to be with you here today at the actual stage. Like, this stage doesn't get a lot of work sometimes. I mean, only Tyson's up here, and that's not that much. So I'm just kidding. That's a joke. I'm excited to preach here. If you're one of your first times here, you might not know this, but we have 4 different campuses, and so we all share the same message each week, and usually that comes from 57th Street campus, and so we usually watch it on a screen. But it's excited that today I get to actually do it here. I like preaching here in T a lot because I know you guys all, and it's so cool to see you. But it gets a little awkward sometimes because there's not as many of you. And so, like, I zone in on people sometimes. And all of a sudden, it's like, I've looked at that person like 15 times throughout this message, and I think they think I'm judging them right now, you know? And so if I look at you a bunch, like Aaron, if I look at you a bunch this morning, know that I'm probably not judging you, but maybe I am. So we'll see. We'll see. About 15 years ago, my wife and I, we went to Cancun for our 15-year anniversary. Now, I don't know about you, like, I like vacations that are not like adventure vacations. I don't want to go on an adventure on my vacation. I don't want to go sightseeing on my vacation. I want to sit my butt in the beach during my vacation. Anybody else like that? Like, I don't want to move. I like sightseeing, I like adventure, but if I'm going on a vacation, I want to sit my butt in the beach. And so we ended up going to Cancun for our 15-year anniversary. And if you've been to Cancun before, you'll know this, but those quiet moments on the beach, as you're just sitting on the beach and just relaxing and listening to the waves and eating food and all that fun stuff, are interrupted with street vendors and beach vendors constantly. Like, they are just constantly coming up to you, offering you seashell necklaces and Oakley sunglasses, you know? Like, it's like always being interrupted with these beach vendors. When I went down there, I forgot a hat. And so I think they saw, like, white, bald guy. Let's get this guy a hat. Like, he needs a hat. I'm going to try him. It's $40 for this hat. I'm like, no way I'm spending $40 for that hat. But I remember we went out one day, and we were actually, my wife and I were going to this mall, and we were walking to this mall, and the street vendor hops out, and he says, hey, I recognize you. Do you guys go, are you staying at the Golden Parnassus? That was our resort. I'm like, yeah, we are staying at the Golden Parnassus. That's crazy. He's like, I served you last night. Like, he's like, I work here during the day, but at night I serve at the Golden Parnassus. I remember you and your wife. And I'm like, that is amazing customer service, isn't it? Like, you would remember me and my wife from the night before. So I went and I looked at his stuff a little bit, and that was really cool. Next day, we're going somewhere again, and another street vendor hops out. This, you know, there's about 50 in between this, but like, another street vendor hops out. He's like, hey, I recognize you guys. Are you staying at the Golden Parnassus? I'm like, well, yeah, we are staying. This is crazy. We are staying at the Golden Parnassus. He's like, he says, I clean there, and I think I saw you and your wife walking by. He's like, do you want to come in and look at my shop? And I just sat there for a second, and I got to thinking, this is really weird that 2 people would know that we are at the Golden Parnassus. And at that moment, I looked down at my wrist, and I had a bracelet on that was my ticket to get in and out of the resort, and written right on there was Golden Parnassus. And in that moment, I realized I am an idiot American. Like, I just bought into this idea that they had been seeing me at my thing, and that never actually happened. So, that happened, yeah, but they never actually saw me. So, but today what does this have to do with anything? Today we are going to talk about a story about Jesus, and it's actually a story about Jesus interacting with some street vendors. So let me just set this up a little bit. Jesus is actually nearing the end of his life. He is going to be going to the cross in actually just a few days. It's the end of his 3-year ministry. He's been preaching, and he's been healing, and he's been doing all these amazing stuff for people. And now he's kind of at the end of his life, and he goes up to the temple. The temple was the big religious center at the place. So he goes up to the temple, and this is what happens. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations,' but you have made it a den of robbers." So Jesus, he meets these street vendors, and instead of buying something for them or getting worked over like a dumb American like I did, Jesus gets a little aggressive. He overturns their tables of seashell necklaces and fake Oakleys, and he basically tells those street vendors, "Get out of here. You need to get out of this place." And some of us, we always thought Jesus was really warm and friendly and cuddly all the time. Not so much. Now, if you grew up in church, you've maybe heard this story before. It's a really famous story. It's actually in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This story is in every single gospel. It was a really important story. And as I heard this story as a kid, I kind of thought this was like Jesus' temper tantrum at the temple. It sounds like a pay-per-view event, like Jesus' temper tantrum at the temple. And that's what I always thought this was, is Jesus just got angry and he flipped these things over. But there's actually so much more going on in this story than that. There's so much more going on than Jesus just getting angry when he sees these money changers and these street vendors in the temple. So let's go back to the beginning. I just want to work through this story and what's happening here. So the first verse, on reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts. Now, in order to understand this story, we need to understand what the temple was like. This temple was large. It was 500 yards by 325 yards. So that's 35 acres big. Now, just for comparison, if you know we're trying to build a church across the way, that's 4 acres over there that we have. That's how much bigger. And that was the whole building was 35 acres. This is a huge temple. And the temple had all these different divisions in it. And certain divisions where only certain people could go. The first division was what we call, I'm tripping over Tyson stuff, was what we call the court of the Gentiles. And that's right here. This area here and this area over there. That's the court of the Gentiles. And that is a place where the non-Jewish people could go. So anybody that was from a foreign land that wasn't Jewish, they could go in that area. So that place right there, that was for everybody. Like anybody could go and worship in the court of the Gentiles. If you move more in here, this was the court of the women. That's where only Jewish women could go. And then if you moved up here a little bit more, this was the court of the men. That was where the only circumcised Jewish males could go. And then you had the court of the priests, which was inside there. And then in this big building, inside there was something called the Holy of Holies. And that was a place where only the high priest could go one time a year, and he would sacrifice something for the sins of the people. So there's all these different things, but the kind of coolest thing, you probably didn't know this, off to the side there was something connected to the temple. There was a subway connected to this temple, because every great worship space needs a subway next to it. You didn't know that, did you? Like, that's why you come to church, to learn information like this. Now, all those different courts don't matter. The one that matters is the court of the Gentiles. That's the one we're going to be talking about over and over again. The court of the Gentiles. That's where this story took place. That is the place where everybody could come and worship God, was in the court of the Gentiles. So this place, the court of the Gentiles, it was created as a space where anyone could worship God, but it became a place filled with street vendors and money exchangers. See, the street vendors, they were selling livestock and doves for sacrifices. Can you imagine that space being filled up with like livestock and doves? Like, I grew up on a farm. It just had to stink so bad. And just so you know, during the Passover, at the height of the Passover, they would slaughter 260,000 lambs in a day. So that's a lot of animals. That's a stinky place. The street vendors, they were also selling like sacred objects for the altar in the temple. So they would take these sacred objects and they would mark them up like 600% to sell them at the temple. And if you don't know what that's like, just go to a Vikings game and buy a hot dog sometimes. Like, you know, it's like $12 for a hot dog, like it's $1 at the gas station. So like, that's what they were doing. They were marking these things way up for people. And also there was money exchangers. You can put that back up there. There was money exchangers as well. And so what the money exchangers would do is there was people coming from all over the place, different countries. They were coming to worship at the temple, but they would have different currencies. And so they had to pay a temple tax when they came. And so these money exchangers would exchange their currencies into the currency that they needed for the temple tax. But what would they do? They would mark it up. They would charge them extra during this time. So basically, the Gentiles' court was a place that was designed for everyone to worship, and it had become a stinky shopping mall, a marketplace, a one-stop shop for all your religious needs. And so what does Jesus do? He walks into this place. What does he do? Next verse. Jesus began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. So Jesus, he goes up to these street vendors, these money exchangers, and he starts overturning their tables. Now, I said before, as a kid, I thought this was like Jesus's temple tantrum. Yeah, there you go. Tantrum at the temple, right? But man, this is far from a temper tantrum. Jesus didn't walk into this place and lose his mind. Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. You know, when we get angry, a lot of times it's spur of the moment, right? We lose it in a fit of passion. That's not what's happening here. Jesus knew what he was doing. This was not the first time that Jesus had been to the temple. As a boy, he had probably gone to the temple every single year. So he wasn't walking into this temple like, what are these guys doing? I'm going to throw it. He had seen this before. He had seen them in the temple year after year after year. So he didn't overturn these tables in a reckless rage. This was calculated. Jesus knew what he was doing. We also know this wasn't a reckless rage because immediately after overturning the temple, it says that he taught them. And then it says that the blind and the lame came to him being healed. I don't know about you. If someone loses it, I'm not going to come to them for healing, right? If someone just loses their mind, I'm getting as far away from that person as possible. No, Jesus did this. This was calculated. This was not a reckless rage. Jesus was trying to teach the people something. So what is he trying to teach? He taught them, is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. Now, what did he mean by house of prayer? You know, when we think of prayer, we oftentimes think of like mindlessly reciting something to a deity. A prayer is just connecting with God. Prayer is worshiping God. That's all it is. It's simple. Jesus is saying this house, this temple, is a place where people should connect with God. This house, this temple is a place where people should hear from God. This house, this temple is a place where people should worship God, and you've turned it into a shopping mall. You've turned it into a den of robbers. Now, the street vendors and the money changers, they were literally stealing money from people in the temple courts. But even more important than robbing the people of their money, they were robbing the people of their worship. Remember this, the court of the Gentiles. This is the place where anyone could go and worship. Like, didn't matter if you were Jewish or whatever, you could come and worship God in this space. And it had been taken over by a den of robbers. Jesus goes into the space, he overturns the tables to teach us something. What does he want to teach us? Don't get in the way of worship. Don't let anything get in the way of worshiping God. Now, when most people think of this passage, they like to criticize the church. They say, the church shouldn't be a place of like materialism. The church shouldn't be a place of merchandising. I knew a church once that wouldn't sell t-shirts in it because of this passage. Like they wouldn't sell a t-shirt because of this passage. And I think it's good. Like the church should listen to this passage and become, try to get rid of the things that are keeping us away from worshiping God. But something much more deeper is going on here. Something much more important is happening. Do you know what ends up happening to the temple? So Jesus is here at about 30 AD. 40 years later, 70 AD, Rome would go into Jerusalem and they would destroy the temple. Gone. Actually, they burned almost all of Jerusalem to the ground. No more temple. Temple's gone. That's a problem, right? The temple's gone. Where are we going to worship? Listen to what Paul, one of Jesus' followers, says about this. It says, don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple? And that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? And then he goes on to say, do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? Now this is crazy if you think about it. The temple is no longer a building. The temple is you. The temple is me. If you have received Christ into your life, the Holy Spirit has come into your life. And the temple, the brick and mortar temple, is gone, and God resides in you. Now, what in the heck does that have to do with anything that we're talking about? Jesus went into the brick and mortar temple, overturning the tables to teach them, don't let anything get in the way of worship. But now you and I are the temples. And Jesus comes into the temple of our heart. And he says, I will overturn the tables. Don't let anything get in your heart that will get in the way of worshiping me. I'm willing to overturn the tables in your life to make sure that nothing gets in the way of the worship. I'm willing to remove the dirty animals and the manure from your life to make sure that nothing gets in the way of worship. I'm willing to chase out the money changers and all those people selling so that nothing gets in the way of worship. Do you see it? This story is about us. We are the temple. We have invited in the money changers. We have invited in the street vendors to cloud out our worship. So my question for us this morning is, what has gotten in the way of your worship? What tables in your life need to be overturned? Now, I know I'm a pastor. I'm not talking about coming here. Like, what's getting in the way of you getting to church? I mean, that's a good question, but that's not what I'm talking about. What is getting in the way of the worship of your life, your devotion, your connection with God every single day? Maybe it's apathy. If we're being honest, and I'm being honest here, many times I just don't care that much about God. I spend my life in trivial things of entertainment and sports and you name it, and I just don't care that much about God. And God says apathy is getting in the way of worship, and that's a table that needs to be overturned. Maybe it's lack of commitment. You know, there's a difference between dating and being married, right? There's no commitment in dating. Some of us are just dating God. We're not married to him. You know, we come to church every once in a while. We read our Bibles every once in a while. We pray every once in a while. We just don't have commitment. God says, your lack of commitment is getting in the way of worship. You need to overturn that table. Maybe it's distractions. And I'm primarily, whatever that word is, thinking of our little phones that we have and social media. And those things, whether it's TikTok or fantasy football or Facebook or Amazon, they are such a distraction. Many of us say we don't have time for things. If we would just run that little timer on our phone and see how much time is spent on them. This thing is incredible distraction. And God says this distraction is keeping you from worship, and it's a table that needs to be overturned. Maybe it's busyness. I mean, my life is so cluttered with my kids. They're good, but cluttered with my kids, work, and activities that it's so hard on a daily basis to be close to God. And my guess is that's true of you as well. And I know we always get rid of busyness, I don't know that busyness is ever going away. I don't know that it is. And some busyness is really great to have a full life, right? But this is the deal. Don't let busyness take over first place from worship. Don't let busyness become more important than your worship. Has the busyness of kids' soccer, dance, and baseball games taken priority over worshiping God? Has the busyness of our demanding job, late nights, mornings, and weekends taken priority over our relationship with God? Has the busyness of a million house projects and time-consuming hobbies taken priority over worshiping God? Busyness is a table that needs to be overturned. It's getting in the way of worship. And lastly, maybe it's sin. Some of us, actually all of us, are making choices in our life that aren't great. Just because you become a Christian or just because you go to church doesn't mean that sin magically disappears. Sin is a constant temptation. Are there choices in your life? Is there a way you're living your life that isn't glorifying to God, that is getting in the way of your worship? Jesus said, that's a table that we need to overturn. And I could go on, but I think you get the point. You and I are the temple. You and I were designed to worship God. But the street vendors and the money changers have made their way into our lives, and they're robbing our worship. So what's getting in the way of your worship? What tables do you need to overturn? My challenge for us today is to engage in worship. If you call this place your home, and I know some of you maybe don't, maybe this is your first time coming here. When you come here on Sundays, get ready to worship God. Sing, clear your mind of all the extra junk and focus it on God. Come in this place willing to serve. Don't just attend, but find ways to serve other people, and God will work through you in amazing ways. But not just Sunday, that's just the smallest piece. Every single day, clear ways for worship. Engage. Find 30 minutes a day, 15 if you have to just spend some time with God. Reading your Bible, in prayer. Find ways to engage with other people and serve them. Overturn the tables in your life so that you can experience all that God has. What would it look like for you to start to lean in and engage in worship instead of just attend? C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia books, he's awesome. I read a lot of his stuff, but he has a quote that I heard probably back in college, and it's always just come up and up and up and over again in my life, and I think it's so good. Let me read it for you. This is what he said. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. What he's saying is this, I think. We are far too easily pleased with the money changers and the street vendors in our lives. We are far too easily pleased with those tables that we set up in our lives that keep us from worship. And what are we missing out on? This isn't a guilt thing. I don't want you to feel guilty today, like, oh, I got to do better. We are missing out on infinite joy. We are missing out on God, a God who loves you, a God who is for you, a God who sees your sin and forgives you, a God who can take all your pain, he can take all your suffering and turn it for good. And I'm no different than you guys. I just keep propping the tables up in my life. I keep inviting the money changers and the street vendors in. When God's like, man, I would do anything to clear that out so you could just worship me. I want to give you a moment here at the end of the service, and just going back to that question, what is getting in the way of your worship? What tables in your life need to be overturned? And I'm just going to give you a moment here, and then Tyson and the band's going to come up, and they're going to lead us in a song that just really pulls this all back together.
Hey everyone, it's Adam from Embrace. If you enjoyed today's message, make sure to subscribe to Embrace's YouTube channel to stay updated. You can also click here to check out other videos. Thanks for watching.